Have you ever looked closely at photos taken by astronauts in space? Whether it's images from the Moon, the International Space Station, or Apollo missions, one thing stands out: no stars in the sky. But why? Shouldn't space be filled with countless stars? Is NASA hiding something? Or is there a scientific explanation behind this? Today, we're diving deep into this cosmic mystery. First things first, the stars are always there. They don't disappear or get erased. The real issue lies in how cameras work. When astronauts take photos on the Moon or in space, their cameras are usually focused on something bright, like the Moon's surface, their white spacesuits, or the spacecraft. But what does that have to do with stars? Cameras automatically adjust their exposure settings to capture details in bright areas. This means they use short exposure times, preventing faint light sources, like stars, from appearing in the image. If you look up at the night sky with your eyes, you can see stars clearly. But if you take a quick photo with your phone, most of those stars disappear. That's because starlight is much dimmer compared to other light sources, requiring a long exposure to be captured. The same principle applies in space photography. On Earth, astrophotographers use long exposure to capture breathtaking images of stars. But in space, astronauts typically use short exposure times because their focus is on objects in the foreground. On February 7, 1984, NASA astronaut Bruce McCandless made history by performing the first ever untethered spacewalk outside the Challenger space shuttle. Suspended in the vast emptiness of space, McCandless became the first person to float freely without a safety tether. The iconic image of him drifting in space became one of the most famous photos in history. But guess what? The sky behind him is completely dark, no stars. But why? Because the spacesuit and the shuttle were brightly lit by the sun, and the camera adjusted its settings accordingly. As a result, faint stars were not captured in the shot. So no, NASA didn't edit out the stars. It's just a matter of camera exposure settings. Some people believe NASA is deliberately removing stars from space photos, but that's simply not true. The same thing happens in everyday photography. If you take a picture of a bright object during the day, the dimmer background details will disappear. The same principle applies in space. The bright Moon, spacecraft, and astronauts dominate the exposure settings, making stars invisible. NASA has actually released long exposure photos where stars are clearly visible. For example, the Hubble Space Telescope captures stunning images of galaxies and stars because it's designed to take long exposure shots. To see stars from space, special camera settings are required. Using long exposure photography, we can capture the stars just like astrophotographers do on Earth. Apollo astronauts reported seeing countless stars with their naked eyes while in space.
Hippity hoppity, hippity hoppity, hippity hopping over hill and dale.
Apollo sent a dozen Americans to rove the surface of the Moon.
However, since their cameras were focused on the Moon and equipment, those stars weren't visible in their photos. So yes, the stars are there. We just need the right techniques to capture them. The reason we don't see stars in space photos isn't a conspiracy. It's just photography science. Just like how you can't see a dim light bulb in bright sunlight, space photography follows the same rule. The stars haven't disappeared. They're just not captured due to short exposure times. If you enjoyed this deep dive into space photography, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more mind-blowing science content.